order. And we start with the acknowledgement that in Ottawa, we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on April 29, 2021, the committee is meeting on the study of the sex trafficking of Indigenous peoples. To ensure an orderly meeting, participants speak and listen in the official language of your choice. And at the bottom of your screen, and this is important, you'll see a globe. Clicking on that globe, you'll select either English or French. And when you're speaking, though, you won't have to change back and forth. If you're fluently bilingual, I applaud you, but you need to have the speaker selected on the globe. When speaking, slowly and clearly, please. And when you're not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. With us today for 2 hours are the following expert witnesses. Cora Maguire-Surratt, the Executive Director of the Ontario Native Women's Association, and appearing as individuals, Courtney Skye, Research Fellow at the Yellowhead Institute, Cherry Smiley, PhD candidate at Concordia University, and we await Chris Stark, author and researcher. So witnesses, we typically begin with about 6 minutes of your presentation and followed by rounds of questionings. So Cora, would you like to start, please? Welcome to the committee. Please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Coralie Maguire-Surratt, and as you know, I am the Executive Director of the Ontario Native Women's Association. This year marks ONWA's 50th anniversary, making us the oldest and largest Indigenous women's organization in Canada. With a mandate to address violence against Indigenous women, ONWA works on key safety issues such as human trafficking, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and child welfare. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the bravery, wisdom, and leadership of all survivors on this issue, as they are the experts. ONWA has been working with survivors for many years, and this experience forms the basis of our recommendations, as survivors and knowledge holders have reminded us that motherhood is the oldest profession, and this is what we must reclaim in our work. I'll be framing my presentation today based on 3 key points, and while I do not have the time today to explore in depth, it is imperative that they are kept in mind while we continue. First, in 2019, the United Nations released guidelines on combating child sexual exploitation. They state, a child under the age of 18 can never consent to any form of their own sale, sexual exploitation, or sexual abuse, and any presumed consent of a child to exploited or sexual acts should be considered null and void. Additionally, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 35, states that the government has a responsibility to ensure that children are not abducted, sold, or trafficked. ONWA advocates that both of these principles must, without acceptance, be adhered to. Second, the impact of colonization has caused the fabric of strong, self-sustaining Indigenous communities to be eroded. Indigenous trauma, together with more recent constructs, has fostered conditions of normalized violence towards Indigenous women and girls. Direct links have been drawn between the rates of violence that Indigenous women continue to face today and the paternalistic policies emerging from colonization. This systemic discrimination has not been addressed adequately in Canada. This leaves Indigenous women and girls at a heightened vulnerability to experience victimization, including human trafficking. Article 18 of the UNDRIP affirms that Indigenous people have the right to participate in decision-making matters through representatives chosen by themselves, as well as to maintain and develop their own institutions. From this, ONWA asserts that it is fundamental that Indigenous women have the capacity to participate in a wide range of leadership efforts to support our communities, including leading the prevention, intervention, and responding to issues that we face. Third, the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened pre-existing inequalities. By virtue of our gender and our race, as Indigenous women and girls, we are disproportionately experiencing the consequences of COVID-19. This results in an increased risk of Indigenous women and girls being targeted for human trafficking, as well as worsening the situation for those already in trafficking situations. The pandemic has underscored that solutions to human trafficking must be part of an equitable COVID-19 recovery plan. In 2017, we engaged with over 3,360 community members and service providers, including 250 Indigenous human trafficking survivors. The storytelling that was heard resulted in the creation of a strategy titled Journey to Safe Spaces to address this issue. Survivors taught us what trauma-informed care is and what systems need to be changed. Their intentions were clear. They want to protect other Indigenous women and girls from trafficking. We also learned that there is often systemic failures which subject Indigenous women and children to risk. The relationship between child welfare and human trafficking is complex. In our engagements with survivors, we heard many stories. In some instances, the abuse was not identified by any service provider, and children experienced horrific childhood exploitation. In other instances, sexual exploitation began after child welfare became involved. Children must be protected from exploitation, period. This will involve systems working together to protect and ensure the safety of our children. Our report provides clear recommendations for change. All changes must be underpinned by the fact that Indigenous women have human rights. The recommendations from survivors provided the basis for our Courage for Change program, which provides the only long-term intensive case management and support. Our program supported 176 Indigenous women and girls to safely exit human trafficking from 2017 to 2019. Last year in 2020, we've seen a 37% increase in exits. Last, before I conclude, I will highlight 5 essential recommendations, many of which can be found in UNWA's Reconciliation with Indigenous Women's report. In this report, we recommend actions are very specific and targeted to end human trafficking while supporting survivors. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls National Action Plan does not include our report's recommendations sufficiently. First, collaborative mechanisms must be put in place to allow for provincial and national data collection on human trafficking of Indigenous women that protects the privacy of survivors who access the services with data collected by the legal reform. Second, sustainable programs and services that address human trafficking survivor-specific needs, including wraparound support, 24-hour services for human trafficking in cities all across the country must be implemented. Third, specialized trauma-informed services for survivors who appear in court be created. When charges are laid against a trafficker, survivor safety must be prioritized throughout the legal process. Fourth, the federal government needs to clear the records of survivors of any criminal offenses for prostitution-related offenses and debt forgiveness for student loans. Fifth, additional funding is urgently required to address human trafficking well beyond the provision of funds for education-related activities only. This is to include comprehensive human trafficking exiting support, such as mental health and addiction services, housing, specialized long-term healing, and supportive services. In closing, I encourage the committee to review our Reconciliation with Indigenous Women report and our Journey to Safe Spaces strategy in full, as they provide a roadmap to keep Indigenous women and girls safe from human trafficking and the supports needed to rebuild their lives. Miigwech.
Ms. McGuire-Surratt, thank you so much for the presentation. And next, we'll go to Ms. Sky from the Yellowhead Institute. Please go ahead for up to 6 minutes.
Good morning, committee. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Courtney Sky. I'm a research fellow with the Yellowhead Institute, and I'm Mohawk Turtle Clan from 6 Nations of the Grand River Territory. I want to acknowledge the Algonquin Territory, where many of you are sitting, and welcome you virtually to Haudenosaunee Territory, the homelands of my ancestors and our allies. I too want to share Cora's words and acknowledging the families and the women and people who have experienced sex exploitation and the reason that we're here to gather and discuss today. My research centers around ending violence and the intersection between ending violence against Indigenous women and girls and leadership and governance. So I have a particular interest in research around Haudenosaunee governance and invigorating and revitalizing the traditional governance systems that are inherent with Indigenous laws and practices. That includes looking at research and multinational approaches. And my work around human trafficking extends back to when I was a policy analyst with the Ontario Public Service, working on child welfare reform, through working with Indigenous women's organizations across Ontario and Canada, and then work internationally with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which looks at multi-jurisdictional responses and policy frameworks that address all forms of human trafficking. So I have a particular interest, especially in the interjurisdictional issues that often impact both legislative changes and policy changes that are required to end multiple forms of trafficking. I think it's important in this conversation that we remember that there's a spectrum. While we're here to talk about sex exploitation and trafficking, it's important to remember that there are spectrums of this conversation that often get conflated or misconstrued, both in challenging the legitimacy of sex work as work, but also in the many different forms of trafficking that Indigenous people may experience, whether it's trafficking for forced labor or trafficking for adoption or other forms of trafficking that are known to be experienced by people who experience the multiple forms of and multiple barriers that Indigenous people experience. And so I'm happy to meet with the committee and talk about these issues. If there are any particular topics or areas that would be useful to your study, I'm here and anxious to have those conversations. But as always, I want to be mindful of some of the issues that Cora raised as well around some of the failures to implement, a foundational human rights frameworks that are necessary to address, the reason why Indigenous women are more vulnerable to different forms of violence, but also that we look towards the communities themselves and their human rights frameworks and their own inherent laws and jurisdictions. They need to be revitalized to address some of the underlying issues that raise the concern around the specific population that we're here to talk about today. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm just going to remind you when we get to the questions and answers, have that microphone a little closer. But I heard you fine. Very good presentation. Thank you for that. And we'll go to our Concordia candidate, Cherry Smiley. Cherry, please go ahead for up to 6 minutes. Yeah, you're on mute. Check your mic switch.
Am I off mute?
There you are.
Right
Go
on.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic, and thank you for studying this very difficult issue. My name is Cherry Smiley. I'm from the Itlakatmuk Nation from BC and from the Navajo Nation from the Southwestern United States. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Concordia University, where my research works to help end male violence against Indigenous women and girls in Canada, including prostitution. And I'm the founder of Women's Studies Online, a decolonizing educational platform for research, education, and action. As part of my doctoral project, I did fieldwork in Canada and New Zealand on prostitution. Before beginning the PhD program, I worked at a rape crisis center and transition house for battered women and their children. There's of course a lot to say, and I know my friends here today and the others who've spoken before this committee have given a solid overview of the dire circumstances of Indigenous women and girls in Canada related to sexual exploitation. So I'll address two topics today. First, I'm going to talk about the difference between sex trafficking, prostitution, and sex work. Secondly, I'm going to talk about issues when it comes to doing research on sex trafficking, and I'll conclude by making some recommendations. Language matters, and this issue is a controversial and political one. The term sex work implies that some women are obligated to provide sexual services, in quotation marks, to men for money. This is not a term I use, and I hope most others don't use this term here either. Janine Benedet has described the difference between prostitution and sex trafficking as follows. Sex trafficking always involves a third party, so a trafficker, a pimp, or a brothel owner, while prostitution can, but doesn't necessarily involve a third party. Prostitution and sex trafficking are more similar than they are different. The impacts on women bought and sold are the same, and the men who purchase sex acts from these women and girls are the same. The men don't care how she got there. Secondly, sex work researchers try to make a distinction between chosen sex work and forced sex trafficking. This isn't a realistic or helpful way to look at the issue, and what it ends up doing actually is harming victims. Sex work researchers have adopted a very anti-woman and anti-feminist theory of sex trafficking that narrowly constructs a false perfect victim. A woman who, for example, may not speak English, who is kept locked to a bed in chains. There is absolutely no doubt that women are sexually exploited in this way. I've met women who have been exploited in that way. But in the same way that patriarchy has constructed a false narrative of the perfect rape victim who fights off her rapist in just the right way, or the perfect battered woman who of course never goes back to her battering husband, few women, if any, would fit the definition of the perfect sex trafficking victim. So does this mean that women haven't been sex trafficked? No, it doesn't. This means actually that there's a profound, and I would argue deliberate, lack of understanding about male violence against women and a lack of feminist research being conducted on this issue today. We've already seen what's happened in New Zealand. A lack of understanding about male violence against women has resulted in the decriminalization of men who pimp and buy women. In turn, this means because women who don't very obviously and distinctly label themselves as trafficking victims and accept whatever help comes their way, they aren't trafficking victims. Trafficking doesn't exist in New Zealand, according to the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, and this is an outright lie. Sex trafficking absolutely does exist in New Zealand. Only police have less ability to investigate potential cases of trafficking. Cases of sex trafficking are reclassified as family violence, for example, to bolster false claims that decriminalizing men who pimp and purchase sex acts helps women in prostitution. And women and girls who are in prostitution and who have been sex trafficked have no support services available to them. There are no exiting services in New Zealand. Services for women who've been assaulted by men in New Zealand aren't equipped to work with women who have been sex trafficked or prostituted because they don't understand prostitution as a form of male violence. It's simply a job like any other. I'll conclude by saying that sex trafficking and prostitution are linked. So one of my recommendations, like Diane Red Sky, is that we keep and improve on the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. Sex buying must remain illegal and women must not be punished for their prostitution. If PSEPA is repealed, we say as a country that it's okay to purchase that group of women in prostitution over there, but not this group of trafficked women over here. And that's just completely unacceptable. We also need a guaranteed livable income, and we saw how quickly the government recognized the economic impact on Canadians during the pandemic and acted accordingly. Guaranteed livable income recognizes the economic impacts of patriarchy on women in Canada and acts accordingly. Women must have more economic actions that don't include sucking dick for $10. The third recommendation I'll make is that while culturally relevant services are essential, what's more essential is that non-Indigenous organizations and Indigenous organizations have a feminist understanding of the impacts of colonization on Indigenous women and girls. There's a whole body of knowledge out there on male violence against women that feminists have created, and this is where we need to start. Feminism is the only theory, practice, and social political movement that always prioritizes women and girls. And we need to learn about this and put into practice a feminist understanding of sex trafficking and prostitution. Without this understanding, it's too easy to blame and shame women and girls for their prostitution and too easy to let men off the hook for their unacceptable behavior. Without this feminist foundation, even culturally relevant services won't be of much service to sex trafficked women and girls. As my friend Faye Blaney mentioned the other day, we need core funding for autonomous Indigenous women's organizations so we can do this work and more easily than we do now on shoestring budgets, or in my case, and in the case of many other women, no budget at all. Lastly, patriarchy and what Adrienne Rich and Carol Pateman call the male sex right are the sources of harm in sex trafficking and in prostitution. In addition to preventative programs aimed at girls and women, we need preventative programs aimed at boys and men to stop them from sexualizing, feeling entitled to, and exploiting girls and women in the first place. Sex trafficking and prostitution are issues of sex-based inequality. Men are overwhelmingly buyers and pimps. Women and girls are overwhelmingly sellers of sex acts. So we need to approach this issue using feminist theory. My final recommendations are to stop watching porn, and perhaps, for example, proposing a pledge for MPs and others in government that they will not pay for sex acts from any women or girl, trafficked or not. Treating all women with respect is a reasonable requirement of leadership in Canada. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Clerk, I don't see Chris Stark on the grid yet. Okay, so should we get a connection, then we'll work on it at a time. But right now we're going to move on to our round of questioning. So witnesses, thank you for the excellent testimony. Our first round is 6 minutes each from Mr. Viersen, Mr. Pulowski, Madam Berube, Rachel Blaney. Arnold, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, and I want to really appreciate your testimony. Ms. Smiley, if we can just dig into the situation in New Zealand a little bit more, that's really interesting. The situation in New Zealand is similar to Canada in terms of we have a similar kind of basis in law. Just wondering how changes in law in New Zealand have affected their First Nation communities. I know that as a percentage of the population, their Maori Indigenous population is about the same as Canadian population percentage of First Nation Inuit Métis, and so the correlation is fairly similar, other than the fact that New Zealand's an island nation and not right next to the United States. But just wondering if you can outline a little bit about how laws have changed there and what's been the effect on the Indigenous population.
Sure. So I spent about almost 4 months in New Zealand researching prostitution and the changes in the law that they've had there, where they fully decriminalized. So they decriminalized women in prostitution, but they also decriminalized the pimps, the men who sell women, and the sex buyers. The thing that I noticed most, that I learned in New Zealand, was that sex work does work if you're a man who wants to exploit women. So it really doesn't work for women. What I saw was I met with women who had tried 5, 6, 7 times to leave prostitution and they couldn't, because there was no services that recognized the trauma of being in that circumstance, day after day after day, where you're being penetrated by however many men every day. That's your job. You do it whether you feel like it or not. There definitely Maori women have not benefited at all, in particular from the decriminalization laws there. There's kind of anecdotal evidence that children, you're seeing more Maori children, more Maori girls entering into street prostitution at a younger age. But also, I know there's a challenge, or at least there is a challenge coming, where a Maori woman and an ally of hers are actually challenging the prostitution legislation, claiming that the legislation didn't consult with Indigenous women, the prostitution legislation, before it was implemented, which they didn't. And so in New Zealand, there's this cover, there's so many people there that are afraid to say anything, they were afraid to speak with me. They were afraid people were going to find out that they were critical of prostitution, or that they had questions, or they had doubts. And so it was incredibly difficult, because you have the government, you have nonprofit organizations, you have women's organizations. Everybody has kind of come together and decided that sex work is work. And so there are consequences for women who have doubts about that. And so what we hear coming out of New Zealand is overwhelmingly positive, but the reality is not that at all.
The switching to Ms. McGuire-Syrett, the national hotline has been up and running now for a couple of years. Do you have anything to the national hotline for human trafficking victims? Do you have any experience with it, and has it been achieving its kind of stated goals?
I don't know much about the hotline. I do know that it's beginning to collect data. Really, where the gap is if a trafficked woman or girl or child needs to access services, that's the gap all across Canada. There is no specialized services across Canada. ONWA, we started up one of the first comprehensive exiting programs, started up in Thunder Bay, and when we began to do the work, we recognized in Ontario that there's a triangle of trafficking of Indigenous children, youth, and women from Thunder Bay to Toronto to Ottawa. That's the triangle, and that's just across the province. But trying to get access, like, women call us all the time from other provinces, and there is no specialized services on the ground to help them. Nobody is reaching out to the youth to help them. The fact that children and youth have an expectation to keep themselves safe is a systemic failure in our communities and in our society. And I echo what my fellow leaders here are saying and speaking to, that the violence against Indigenous women and children has become so normalized that we need to have this conversation, and really we need to make sure that this stays illegal, period, and that that most trafficking victims are under the age of 18, and those that are over the age of 18, they also need support of wherever they're at on the spectrum. Whether there's no fine line between, whether you're into prostitution and being trafficked each day. It definitely does differentiate, but the main point is that we need to have supportive services, and we have to change this here in Canada. And there is nothing on the ground.
Thanks very much. That brings us to time. And Mr. Pawlowski, 6 minutes. Go ahead.
I'm going to direct my questions to my fellow. We don't even know what to call us, Thunder Bayans, Thunder Bayites. We know what Hamiltonians and Torontonians. Anyhow, Cora, you mentioned in the route for sex trafficking, Thunder Bay, Toronto, Ottawa, which kind of leads me to think gangs right away. How much of this is related to gangs? I know in Thunder Bay we have a lot of gangs, Indigenous gangs, Toronto gangs, Ottawa gangs. How much is this problem all kind of swirl and involve the gangs?
It's not as much as you would think. It's more around violence knows no boundaries. And when there is criminalized activity involved, organized, they don't have policies to follow or bureaucratic processes that they need to get to change in order to do different tactics. And they're very very organized. Like they're able to, like, they read the news. I wouldn't doubt if some organized crime is watching our testimonies here today in order to figure out the tactics and to come up with new strategies. And so there is an organized crime aspect to it, definitely. With Indigenous women and girls, there's also the history of colonization that also impacts, like, Indigenous women and girls have to negotiate their safety for their basic human rights to meet their basic needs. And so there really is a comprehensive approach that we have to look at. How do we stop sexualizing our children and our youth? Like, where is the sexual violence programming in all of our communities? Like, if you look at a map of Ontario and you see where there's sexual predators, it's across the entire province. And the movement of I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember, the Me Too movement actually stopped in Indigenous communities, because it's not safe to talk about and to disclose sexual violence. And that's one of the root causes of trafficking, from what we've seen with the women we're working with.
So you're saying organized crime, but not necessarily gangs?
It's everything. That's where, when you look at why there's such high rates of trafficking, because there's so many different parts of it. So it is organized crime, it is gangs, it's families, it's communities. So violence against Indigenous women is happening from everyone in society. We have to stop that normalization of people approaching a young child on city transportation, just trying to get to and from home, and you have a perpetrator targeting children and youth online. And so it's one part organized, one part crime, one part our society.
Now, how much does this problem also involve drugs and getting people addicted to drugs and therefore kind of financially obligated to someone else?
Mm-hmm. That's one part of the control, right? So you get these gifts with invisible strings, they're called. So one part of control is around getting addictions. And, here on the ground in the city, that access to barrier-free access to mental health and addiction services is very rare. And I would say that probably across the country, that is something that we're seeing as another gap. In order to have instant barrier-free access to services that they need, including addiction, is very difficult in us helping support exiting.
So the gift is to give someone drugs, to get them hooked, and then to pay back, they have to do something for whoever's using them. Is that kind of how it works?
That's one part. Another part is like, here in the north, there is no transportation. We have to look at transportation services. So women are being trafficked in order to get to a medical appointment if they're from a northern community to get into the city. That's another piece of this puzzle.
This is quite a depressing topic, but I was interested. One of the things you suggested was debt forgiveness for student loans, which certainly suggests that at least some people are getting out of this kind of work, and I put quotation marks, work, and getting educated. Can you give us any good stories about people who have managed to transition out into a better life?
Yeah. Prior to the pandemic, we started a ride-along with the Thunder Bay Police, and the part of the ride-along was actually directed to us from survivors. They said that we need to build a relationship with all services in order to comprehensively address this. So in our ride-along, we actually were able to connect with two children who had just gotten onto the streets during that time, and we safely exited them within days of them getting onto the streets. And they are now safe. And we know that the recovery time, the healing time, the sooner that we can help with exiting strategies, the sooner the women are able to reclaim their lives. But that's the part that's missing here. We need those specialized programs and services, as Ms. Smiley had talked about, that doesn't exist, because you can't just have regular victim services to do this work. That they do not work. We need specialized programs and services.
That will do it, Mr. Poloski. Thank you very much. And Madame Bérubé, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start by asking Ms. Maguire some questions, and this follows on to what my colleague just said. You referred to colonisation, systemic discrimination, supporting communities. How can we achieve this based on your research results when it comes to sex trafficking of women?
We need everything from policies to programs. We need to ensure that the legislation keeps this illegal, that we need to protect women and children in our society. We need to say as a society, as leaders, as Canada, as a community, that this violence is not acceptable. And so we need political will and we need local will. So we need communities to say, how are we going to keep Indigenous women safe in each of our communities?
Vous avez parlé plutôt aussi.
Earlier, you referred to the consequences of COVID-19. Could you elaborate on what those ramifications are and were?
Yes, during COVID-19, not every home was safe to be in, if you had a home, and that the level of violence increased against Indigenous women and girls, and the level of violence on and exploiting children and youth also increased during this time. And we needed the level of community safety response across Canada wasn't there. There is no safety plans for Indigenous women and girls comprehensively across Canada. And that's really where we're able to see in the pandemic that, for instance, the drug trafficking of Indigenous women increased. And, because people didn't have access to their usual types of drugs that they use, Therefore, you've seen an increase in overdoses, an increase in deaths due to that. And who suffered as a result of that was the women and children, those that are currently being exploited, as well as those being recruited to us, especially online. When you're looking at online childhood exploitation, everybody is online during this pandemic. And we need to have, when we're looking at increasing high-speed internet to our Indigenous communities, we need to build in safety protocols to ensure that what they currently don't have access to and they're going to, we need to protect the children in those communities. We need to protect and make sure that cyber services are protecting children.
Ma question va être à Madame.
My next question will be for Ms. Smiley from Concordia University. You did a doctorate on violence against women and you founded a platform. Could you please talk about that a little, please?
Yes, so I'm just about finished my doctorate, so hopefully I'll be a doctor, I guess, in the next couple of months here. But the platform that I founded was actually a response to my experiences in university, and coming from an anti-violence frontline worker background, being involved in feminism for the last, 15 years, and realizing in universities that there was fewer and fewer places, more places to talk about all kinds of theories and intellectual exercises, but less places to talk about the material conditions of women's lives. And so I created this platform as a way to teach basically feminist theory, radical feminist theory, so that we can learn from all of that knowledge that we've created, and we can build on it. So we can reject it, we can decide that it's great, we can decide that, okay, we like this part, not that part. But actually learning that theory before we dismiss it as being irrelevant. And so, because I actually think there's a lot of really good stuff in there that we can build on. And so that's, and as well to do research on issues of male violence related to Indigenous women, and to make sure that this research is looking specifically at male violence against Indigenous women and girls. Of course, there's other types of violence, but this type of violence is incredibly globally. It's everywhere. It's systemic, but it also has particular histories for Indigenous women in Canada. And because of those particular histories, there's particular solutions that we need to be looking at. So it's very much keeping the focus on this type of violence, and going from there.
Thanks, Ms. Smiley. And your cat is providing a release from tension. It looks so happy there behind you.
Yeah, he's pretty chill.
Okay. We'll go now to Rachel Blaney. Rachel, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. If I could come to you, Ms. Sky, my first question is I'm just wondering if you talked about this in your introduction to us, but if you could be more specific about what makes Indigenous women and girls more vulnerable to violence, and how do those responses impact them and the communities around them?
Thank you for the question. I think it's really important that we highlight the specific need to address the specific root causes of violence and colonial violence that Indigenous women experience. If you look to some of the reports that have been developed around things like the homicide report that StatsCan produces, and you see a comparative study between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal identified women within that study, you see since 1980 a decrease in the overall number of women that have been killed, while the rate of violence against Indigenous women has remained consistent across those years. And as a result, Indigenous women represent an increased proportion of victims. that type of analysis or that type of, information being made available really demonstrates that, Indigenous women experience different causes of violence, and that the interventions that have been developed through feminist theory, through kind of typical responses, haven't actually reached these populations, haven't supported them in the way that they need to be supported, and haven't developed the same kind of access to services and supports that Indigenous women require. And there are, of course, underlying human rights issues that underpin that. I appreciate that there are, a need and a special response from government, especially, to consider all the different populations that are impacted and all the different realities of people, to draw out strong policy responses that address, as the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People says, the need for special measures in certain circumstances, but we also have to remember that there's a broad experience related to this issue that needs to be addressed. And so any type of, widespread legislation or national legislation has to consider and be respectful of many different experiences.
So I guess what we've heard from other testimony is that there's challenges, and that like you said in what you just said about the services aren't quite reaching these communities. So what is the block to that? And I'm wondering if you could also talk about the issues that exist between provinces and territories regarding interjurisdictional issues, and how those supports might be fragmented, I guess, for a trafficked person.
Yeah, there's real service issues, but also legal issues within the Canadian legal structure, right? Like, depending on where you live in Canada, different laws apply to you. And there's an inherent unjustness to the way and experiences of Canadians, where there are different legal frameworks, there are different legal recourses available to people. And that's different, province to province, city to city. And so that is, a product of colonialism. But what it also does is creates a patchwork of services and, service access, catchment areas, and things like that create gaps and kind of disproportionate or inappropriate responses to people who may move or just have, a need to have regular services and a base level of service from their government. And so what happens is we have, you know, certain cities, certain places that do have more supports than others and gaps in other parts of the country. And this is why I was so interested in drawing responses or policy knowledge from other parts of the world, because there are, jurisdictional issues and border issues that impact programming and laws and services in Canada. And so what I think we should be looking towards, if we're talking about national frameworks or federal frameworks, that there's this understanding that there are root causes that need to be addressed. And so if we're concerned about, vulnerabilities that result in exploitation, then we should be looking to things like guaranteed basic income, basic health services, a national dental care plan, accessible education, things that are going to make it systemically easier for people to access supports and less reliant on, or being put in a situation where there's no other option for them but to submit to exploitation, if that's the concern of this committee. But we also need to have, a really strong human rights framework that does, uphold people's laws and case law around the right to cell sex.
This is such a complex issue, and I really appreciate that part that you're talking about in terms of basic human rights. But I feel like a lot of Canadians don't understand what people mean when they say Indigenous people need basic human rights. I'm just wondering if you could just say what that means for you, Ms. Sky.
For me, for the past, year, I've been supporting the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council, which is the inherent governance structure of the Haudenosaunee people. We look to our laws, our creation stories, the things that make us distinct, and we look towards how our laws set down governance structures. I look to this federal government, and they have promised a nation to nation relationship, and yet have almost entirely ignored our traditional governance structure in the entire time they've been developing law and policy. And so we look towards, what does it actually mean to have human rights? It means to live under our own laws and our own jurisdictions and our own cultural practices. And without having that kind of respect for what Indigenous nations bring to the symphony that is humanity, we're not actually going to address, the governance issues, the structures, the systemic issues that create vulnerability, that create disunity, that create the lack of social cohesion that exists in Indigenous communities. And so there are really high level, like broad philosophical questions that then begin to impact people's lives on a day-to-day basis, where Indigenous women are denied their basic rights and human dignity. Especially for myself, coming from a matriarchal culture, our clan mothers, who are the stewards of our land, are continually denied their right to exercise our laws and governance in Canada. And so that's the kind of human rights that we're talking about here, where we fundamentally fail to entrench that type of true nation to nation relationship in policy and law. And unless that's going to be addressed, then we're going to continue to see Indigenous communities that don't have or denied kind of the ability to participate freely in our modern society.
Thanks very much. And we're going now to a 5-minute round of questioning. We have Mr. Melillo, Mr. Batiste, Madame Berube, Ms. Blaney, Mr. Schmale, and Adam Van Couverden. So Eric Melillo, would you please go ahead for 5 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to say thank you to all of our witnesses who joined us today. Have given us so much to think about already, and I just appreciate how honest and open everyone has been talking about such an important and difficult issue, many issues, I should say, around this. So I think I will start my questions with Miss McGuire-Surrett. You mentioned a bit about the missing and murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Action Plan in your opening remarks, and I'm from the riding of Kenora, just beside Thunder Bay, and unfortunately that's an issue that is deeply personal for a lot of people in my riding. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I've previously cited in the House and in some other work that there was somewhere near half of the identified cases over the past 8 years that were in the Kenora region alone. So it's just a very, very important issue to many in my riding. So you mentioned that the action plan, in your view, if I'm not mistaken, seemed to miss some key recommendations and missed the mark a bit. And I know you were pressed for time and weren't able to go into a lot of detail. So if you're able to, I'd appreciate if you can expand on some of your thoughts on that.
Definitely, thank you. Yes, we were looking for the National Action Plan to speak to Indigenous women's safety. That's really what we're speaking about here. And there is no investment in Indigenous women's safety here in Canada. Very, very limited. When you're looking at the interconnection between human trafficking and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the data tells you that a large percentage of missing persons cases, there's a high degree of probability that could be a trafficking case. When you're looking at missing children and youth, and you're looking at the interconnection between child welfare, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and human trafficking, there is an intersectionality that goes on there. And what we were looking for from the national inquiry and into the National Action Plan was that data that I believe Courtney spoke to around you've got the homicide reports. So we know the coroner's reports, for instance, that they've given us their knowledge and recommendations around, I believe it was about approximately half of the cases were domestic. And the piece with that's really important to note is that those were preventable deaths by having services and programs and having safety plans. And so what we were looking for is really to tell the story around how did the woman die? who killed her, as one part of the story in order to have stronger policies in order to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it's the same thing happening with, human trafficking of Indigenous women and girls. Like the root causes go back to, in colonization, like here in Canada, we sold Indigenous children. So the selling of Indigenous people has a history of colonization here. And it's continued on to today and to now what we call human trafficking. And, so that's part of the issue. What we're looking at is really two major components at a high level of healing is needed, and Indigenous women specific healing is needed. Because as Ms. Smiley spoke to that, we're talking about Indigenous specific issues. And when we focus on everyone, we focus on no one. And when we're talking about safety issues like human trafficking and missing and murdered, Indigenous women's experience in those issues is very unique, and therefore we need unique solutions.
Thank you very much for that. And I also want to pick up a bit of I think a similar topic you mentioned in your conversation with Marcus already, just about sort of the transportation and the gaps in the north. Many of the communities in my riding are remote communities that are serviced by Thunder Bay, Sioux Lookout, or Winnipeg, and many Indigenous people, many Indigenous women, of course, specifically, have to leave for basic medical care, for job opportunities, for school, for a number of things and obviously that puts them in more vulnerable situations. So I'm not sure how much time you'll have to respond, but if you can talk a bit more about that as well, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Something that we learned from the National Inquiry and from survivors, like when you're looking at the Highway of Tears, you're looking at, Barbara Kentner here locally in Thunder Bay, what it's telling us, it's not safe to be Indigenous and to be an Indigenous woman walking, or the lack of safety. And so with transportation and, the Greyhound system, those issues and there is no safe systems for transportation across Canada. We need to be able to look at how are we going to address that so that we have safe transportation. That's something that's concrete that we can address, that's going to deal with, especially like, when you are looking at Kenora in that district there, what's the transportation, the safe transportation to get to and from larger centers for medical appointments, for instance. It's not there, it doesn't exist. And never mind getting across Canada. And so when you're looking at, having to hitchhike, or you're looking at having to be trafficked in order to get to a medical appointment, that's just not acceptable. And that's part of that, that human rights in order to access basic services. And we do need infrastructure on safe transportation Canada that will address violence against Indigenous women.
Thanks very much for the reply. And Mr. Batiste, would you please go ahead for 5 minutes?
Yes, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony. And I'm coming to you from the Eskasoni Reserve Mi'kmaq community. We're a community of about 5,000. And, and I don't want to paint all the situations with the same brush, because I know it varies, but one of the thoughts and one of the things that is noticed by Indigenous leadership, is that there's a lot of intergenerational trauma that exists currently in our communities, from residential schools that often lead to bad situations at home, and that often lead to people fleeing their home situations, and often addictions are seen as the main causes for people to get into positions where sexual exploitation is possible. I'm wondering, is that, I know that there's more to the story, but is addictions too commonly used as the reason for sexual exploitation? And tell me a little bit about how the basic income guarantee would deter that if addictions are a problem. And also, just because I know I may only get one question, funding autonomous women's organizations, which organizations are we looking at funding? Should we be funding the National Women's Organization? Are we looking at funding the friendship centers, the rural support? In my community, we have a Jane Paul Center that's set up in urban locations. What is the best, efficient, most use of the money, the 2.2 billion that we're putting towards missing and murdered Indigenous women? And so I want to start off with Ms. Smiley and then go to Ms. Sky, if we can, and then.
Sure.
Sure. So I think that's an important point that you're making about these kind of connections between addictions and sexual exploitation. I think what happens a lot is that women are shamed and blamed for both in both of those circumstances. So for engaging in addictions, perhaps as a coping mechanism, maybe because you started smoking crack when you were 10, because it's very normalized, you've grown up around it. Drug dealing, these types of things that are happening. And so it is very tied to sexual exploitation. So it is true that some women turn to prostitution, of course, because they're in this cycle of addiction. But it's also true that I think Cora mentioned earlier that drugs are often used as a way to placate women. And so the pimp will get her addicted to heroin or addicted to whatever, so that it's easier to control her and make her continue in her prostitution. And so, but it is, that women are blamed and shamed for their prostitution, and that they're blamed and shamed for their addictions. I think that's where the connection lies. And I think that when we're talking about services, we really need to think about harm reduction services have a place, of course, but what we see now is you can go to a safe injection site and you can stick a needle in your arm in 10 minutes, but you have to wait 2 weeks or 3 weeks to go to detox. So it's really important that we actually have these services available so people actually have what they need when they need it. I think it's so incredibly important, and that these services are women only. We've heard lots of stories of women being targeted actually by men when they're in detox or recovery houses, and being targeted again there for sexual exploitation. And so I think in terms of the organizations that need to be funded, I really think autonomous women's organizations are so important. When you're part of a larger organization that's essentially male dominated, there's value there for sure, but you are controlled in some way. There is less ability to speak out on, for example, issues of Me Too, like Cora was saying. So I think it's really important that these organizations are autonomous women's organizations, and you could do national, you could do regional, you could do provincial. I think there's a lot of really amazing women doing a lot of really amazing work, and the more that we have, the more discussions we can have, and the better solutions we can come up with.
Thanks, Mr. Batiste. That's your time, but I know that you're having another segment coming up shortly, so perhaps Ms. McGuire Savette can respond at a later time, but just to keep our cycle of questions in order, we'll go to Madame Bérubé now for 2.5 minutes. Sylvie?
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question will be for Ms. McGuire. Earlier, you spoke about child protection. Do you know whether agencies have taken steps to tighten requirements to ensure that Indigenous children are not recruited to the sex industry?
That's a current gap in policy right now, due to the in the child welfare legislation, which is typically about parents, looking at the parents within this, actually looking at the mother specifically. And so, that's a discriminatory policy, but I won't be able to touch on that too much here today, on how the files are opened on the mother, regardless of who victimizes the child. But here in Ontario, we did recently get some new legislation that looks at tightening up those restrictions and being able to charge perpetrators under the Child and Family Services Act. What the reason that's so critical and important, because then you already have an act that's there to protect, and you can charge perpetrators very easily through the system, where then the child welfare system is the one who's taking care of it, and you're not having to rely on children to do testimony and to go through courts of law in order to prove the violence that's happened to them. And so here's an opportunity for us to really look at what child welfare reform really looks like. And a missing component that we're always talking, that never really gets brought up, is mothers. And mothers and parents and fathers and the role there. We're always talking about the jurisdiction over children, but yet the original jurisdiction is with the parents. And the TRC recommendations in there needs to look at, how do we begin to reparent and get parenting programs to support parents with their children, is a really preventative component there. But definitely within the systems, we need to look at, here's a case where child welfare has a role and responsibility to play, not the only role. We need systems to work together. You need police, child welfare, and social services to work together to keep the child safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rachel Blaney, 2.5.
Thank you so much, Chair. Ms. Sky, if I could come back to you. You talked about in your presentation the importance of governance systems, which you just gave an excellent answer on human rights and how those are connected. But I want to talk about, if you could talk about, I should say, governance systems and how they impact trafficking of persons. But you also talked about trafficking of adoption. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about the governance systems, the undermining of those governance systems, and how it relates to the human trafficking today.
Yeah, I think this is really important because I think that, Canada has really lacked and not been advancing strong policy around many different forms of trafficking. And oftentimes, other jurisdictions in the world have had to enact policy in reaction to Canada not having strong program services legislation, because women from this country are being found in other parts of the world. And so that's what international organizations have started to, have a little bit more well-developed policies or programs. And so,
Brittany, could you lift your mic up?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to remember that, so that's why I became involved with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, because they look at many different forms of trafficking, whether it's people who are being trafficked across borders for the purposes of terrorism, children being trafficked for the purposes of adoption, or the way that people might consider the child welfare system as it exists in Canada, that has seen Indigenous children continue to be adopted by non-Indigenous families, removed from their communities, and that being the only kind of way that they can be placed into what's deemed as like an appropriate family, as a form of trafficking. But also the way that trafficking has impacted Canada, and child trafficking specifically. Canada for a long time maintained a program called Home Children, where children from Europe were brought to Canada to populate Canada, and specifically populate Western provinces in order to bolster, the Canadian population, the settler population here. And actually about 12% of Canadians are descendants from this program. And so there's a really, we need to think about what those historical kind of contextual pieces are, but also the way that the legacy of them continue to form and shape the policies that we have today, because there's a direct policy law line from, the legislation that was developed by Canada in the 1800s, the 1920s, through the 1920s, that were inherently racist and discriminatory towards Indigenous people, legacies of the Gradual Civilization Act and such.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schmale, Jamie, are you ready for 5 minutes? Please go ahead.
I most certainly am. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here today. It is a difficult study, but we do appreciate your contributions. I want to talk, I guess, more about some of the content that was mentioned earlier. So I guess I'm going to direct my first batch of questions to Ms. Sky and Ms. Smiley, if I could. I'll let you two decide who would like to go first. A lot of the conversation you had been mentioning, both of you had been mentioning, is in regards to the universal basic income or guaranteed income, whatever you want to call it. To my knowledge, the only country in the world to have that is Iran, and that's paid for through subsidies and sales through oil and gas that they're able to sell. Have either of you potentially looked at other potential solutions, such as economic activity and opportunity in some of these communities, rather than kind of a direct payment?
Yeah, I can start with that. It's actually it's become a misnomer, right? That that economic development actually leads to liberation. It actually doesn't. What makes the biggest difference in mobilizing and creating lasting or systemic change for people and women generally is political mobilization. And that's the catalyst which social change draws from in communities, especially with Indigenous communities, right? So making small investments, teaching someone how to fish kind of examples, those don't actually address any of the systemic issues that create multiple barriers that make people have to, work or be self-reliant, right? We're talking about broad systemic changes and making space for women, their decision making, their leadership, their governance. That is what actually creates lasting social change and lasting and creates safety for people, right? That's what, if you're trying to advance that. But it can't just be limited to socioeconomic investments. It has to go much beyond that, right? Because otherwise, it's just solving, a small problem, perhaps with one family, however many people that you can get into a program, small service numbers, or, one worker that's limited to so many clients. Without kind of broader systemic changes, that we're not actually going to be able to meet many people's needs. And that's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to talk about lifting and supporting all people, which is why something like, guaranteed minimum incomes, that kind of thing, providing a safety net is really important, because we have to have a society, we're a very wealthy country, where we believe in the value of every person and that every person is valuable. Every person deserves dignity regardless of their circumstances.
But wouldn't that ensure that ensuring the maximum opportunity for all, would that not help?
Well, because you can't just look at it within, like, from today moving forward. It has to be contextualized historically, right? So if you look at, I'll give you another example from my territory, right? We had funds as a nation, investments, Indian trust dollars, which is, Yellowhead Report cashback, where our community had around $12 million in 1840. And the federal government redirected that fund into a trust for us. And there were trustees that were appointed by the Crown who misspent about 40% of that trust fund. And by the early 1900s, almost that entire trust fund was depleted to do things like build Osgood Hall, or build Toronto City Hall, or build bridges and infrastructure. And it didn't actually go to our community for our investment and our prosperity. It was exploited from the Crown. So we have many generations of people who were not able to have control over their financial resources, who now exist in a state of chronic poverty because Canada used our money to build infrastructure that serves the settler population and doesn't benefit the Indigenous population. And so now we have people who are experiencing poverty who have not been able to participate in the economy, and were never able to get the economic prosperity that comes from all of the wealth that was generated over the past year in the industrial era.
Well, I get
that's why we need to move forward with
I get that,
thinking
but
about that.
I get that government is the problem, right? Like, I believe the Ottawa Knows Best is causing a lot of these problems. I understand that. What I'm saying is, if we're creating opportunity for all and the ability to climb the ladder, no matter where you are or where you're from, ensuring that that foundation allows people to do that. Without that, I think we're saying that that is kind of the cause of the poverty, the fact that you're in some of these communities. Ottawa knows best, but we want to ensure that there is equal opportunity for all, and that these opportunities are available.
That brings us to time, but perhaps you can pick that up because we have more opportunities coming along. Adam Van Couverden, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I really want to thank the witnesses today for your extraordinary testimony. But beyond that, your extraordinary work, your research, your community service, your advocacy, it's really, really extraordinary. I had a question about disaggregated data, but before I get to the question, I feel like I have an obligation to highlight or at least address some of the kind of fallacious comments regarding a universal basic income that my honorable colleague just kind of put forth. Iran is not the only country in the world with a universal basic income. Countries like Spain and France and Brazil have one, and so does Alaska. Alaska's permanent fund has alleviated poverty, like extreme poverty, almost entirely in Alaska, and versions of a universal basic income have been shown around the world to be extremely effective measures at doing exactly what our witnesses today have pointed out. So on behalf of the committee, I apologize for that misleading statement because it's not at all true. But my question today was about disaggregated data and how, on Parliamentarian Black Caucus, we've committed to gathering more disaggregated data, and where that might not have much to do with our business here on Indigenous and Northern Affairs, I do think it's related in our ability to make good decisions. We really can't change what we don't measure. So my question today is whether any of the witnesses today, but perhaps Ms. Sky, because I believe Ms. Sky, you brought it up first, you share with the committee your perspective on what is working and what's not in terms of the collection of disaggregated data, specific data, and provide some advice on how our government and other governments in Canada can do a better job collecting and using this data for addressing some of these very sensitive issues. Thank you.
Yeah, there's one thing I believe in is drawing strong policy from good data. It's critically important, and knowing the populations that you're working with, because I echo what my colleagues have said here on the panel, is that in all my work with Indigenous women and people who've experienced violence, they want to know that we're actually ending violence. They want to know women are actually being made safer. And if we don't have the data to back that up and show it, we're not actually going to deliver on the commitments that women and communities want and expect from their leadership. You have to be able to prove it. And so I think it's really important that we look and we challenge the way that data is collected and the way that it's reported, because especially with the work of the National Inquiry, we found that there was a ton of gaps in information around being able to identify whether or not someone was Inuit, whether someone was Métis, whether or not their data was being collected, whether or not their nationality was being properly recorded, whether or not white passing or Black presenting Indigenous people are having their identities properly assessed, whether or not there's been an effort to correct misinformation around people's identities, specifically around things like the way that Indian status is assumed to be patriarchal. So for again, people like my nation who are matriarchal, we say like, well, my status card says this, but I'm actually this, because the way that the federal government administers Indian status is completely patriarchal and doesn't include matrilineal descendancy. So I'm enrolled under my paternal grandfather as opposed to my maternal grandmother, as it should be according to our culture and customs. But then also that we are doing the work to respect people and their gender, that we are doing the work to identify trans people and their accurate gender, which is something that's completely lost in many of the forms, and a challenge that has been levied against, some of the StatsCan data and the police reported data around people who have been victimized, that they don't actually have an accurate or a confirmation about whether or not people's gender identity has been accurately captured, and whether or not trans women are being accurately assessed and counted accurately. So all of those things need to be addressed, but it starts with having a consistent expectation around especially how police are reporting data, and standards and regulations around how they're assessing and directed on how to collect that data.
Thank you, Ms. Sky. Am I for time, Mr. Chair?
30 seconds.
Perhaps a quick reflection on a universal basic income from whoever would like to.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about how it's been successful in other places. I know there's been studies done and experiments with universal basic income done in Manitoba. There's been some recently in the States. So it does really, I think that if we think about, I heard a man refer to it as economic opportunity maximization. He was talking about prostitution when he was, and that Indigenous women should be maximizing their economic opportunities by selling their bodies. That's where we end up if we're like, well, everybody should just be able to go and make the most money that they can, and if we're looking at that in a very narrow way, it doesn't reflect our realities. And either way, women are the ones that end up paying the price for that. So universal basic income does really provide a way to alleviate, to address that unlevel playing field. And even if we think about the gender pay gap that we have now, currently still, the universal basic income provides a way to help alleviate that.
Thanks very much. And as we progress toward 1 o'clock, for our witnesses joining us today, I want to say how proud I am that we've been working hard as a committee on the issues that are brought forward on behalf of the people who are affected by those issues. And so it works. The committee members ask questions, the witnesses give answers. And I would caution members to avoid any interplay between committee members, because we want to ensure the people who are coming to visit us, you, our witnesses, that all we have in mind is listening carefully to your testimony and your answers, and then moving toward recommendations. So having said that, I'm going to ask Mr. Viersen up next for a 5-minute intervention. Arnold, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the admonition there. Appreciate that. I'm just gonna go back to Ms. Smiley. I appreciate your testimony. One of the things that you talked about is just about a defense of our current PSEPA bill. Could you just expand on that a little bit more?
It's absolutely necessary that we keep that legislation. We can keep it and we can try and improve it. That, of course, there's lots of room for improvement there, but that fundamental message that the legislation sends is that it is not okay for men to purchase sex acts from women. And so I would respectfully disagree with my friend here, Courtney, that there is no right to sell sex because there's no right to buy sex. That's not a fundamental human right. And so if we get rid of this PSEPA bill, it really does open the door for for traffickers, for pimps, for brothel owners. They come in, they set up shop, and if you're not targeting the demand for paid sex acts, you're not really going to get anywhere substantial, because there will always be women in the current circumstances that we live in who are poor enough and who are desperate enough and who are just have very few choices available to them, and so they will they'll make the best of their circumstance. And I think a lot of times we talk about meeting women where they're at, and that's fantastic, but we need to meet women where they're at and not leave them there. That's the second part. And so the PSEPA bill is incredibly, incredibly important in sending that message that, like, put aside, if you're saying that you like to suck all the dicks, fine. Putting that aside, men do not have a right to expect sex from women and girls on demand, and they don't have an entitlement to that simply because they have the financial ability to pay for it. So it's really important that we start there, and we can move our way out, and we can work with women, of course, where they're at. And you know, that's also why it's so important that we have a feminist understanding. If we look at battered women, for example, so often women will leave and they go back, and they leave and they go back. Or I can think of women who are in the hospital with their throats slit open by their husbands saying, I don't want him to get in trouble though, he really loves me. And so how do we understand these types of sentiments that are coming? Because they don't really make sense, right? And so if we have a feminist understanding of male violence and how it impacts women, both materially in our conditions, but also psychologically, there's, you know, messages that we're getting day in and day out. I think it's so important that we look at the root cause, and the root cause of sex trafficking is the male demand for paid sex acts. And so we need to start there and make sure we do that, because the men, they really don't care. They don't care if she's been trafficked or not. They don't care if she's underage or not. They don't care if she likes her job or not. They really don't care. And so we really need to start there.
One of the things that I know, the average trafficking victim raises about is worth about $320,000 a year, kind of thing. So there's a lot of money in the sex trafficking world, and just how do we get that money out of the system? How do we end that demand? That's kind of the big question. Got any comments around that?
I mean, it is a big question. I think there's a lot of moving parts, but we absolutely cannot legalize and sanction that industry. That is not going to get the money out of that industry. If we decide that, okay, well, we'll just make it legal, or we'll fully decriminalize it, and we'll have brothels everywhere as they do in New Zealand. That's not getting. Organized crime is very, very tied up in that, and it's a little bit easier for them now because they can function legally. They're businessmen, right? They're not pimps anymore. They're brothel owners. They're businessmen. They have business associations, as other businesses do, and so it actually becomes much easier for them to function and to be moving that money around.
The PSEPA bill is based on the.
I'm sorry, Arnold, that we're at 5 minutes there. more opportunities coming. It's such an important conversation. I wish we could go on and on, but we'll follow along with our agenda with Jaime Batiste next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'm hearing loud and clear that decriminalizing prostitution is not part of the solution. What is your thoughts around decriminalizing drug offenses and treating addictions like a health problem, not a criminal problem? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are around that. Can I get a sense of if this is part of the solution? Anyone can chime in, please.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with decriminalizing. Oh, yeah, thank you. Decriminalizing and treating addictions like a health issue. That's absolutely necessary. But I also think too, like if we're understanding that people come to be exploited because they're made vulnerable by our systems and structures, then we have to turn to those systems and structures and understand what exactly about them creates that vulnerability. And so like Anwa's, submission around the need for housing, the need for economic stability, the need to be treated with, to have good access to healthcare services, especially to address drug issues, like that should be the priority here. We're talking about creating systemic change. And I hear what you're saying around, the need to respond to people who are addicted with dignity and respect, and to prioritize them and view them as people as having value in our communities, whether or not they're using and whether or not they're choosing to use different types of, drugs that are more addictive or not.
Would anyone else like to chime in? I've got another question if not.
Sure, I would. Just that I think if we're thinking about drug use and addiction, so one of the things that we often advocate is the Nordic model of prostitution policy. So it's 3 prongs. You decriminalize those who are prostituted. You criminalize the buyers, sex buyers, and the pimps. There's a public education campaign, and there's robust social services to support people, to support the community. You could kind of apply that to drugs as well, because you do have a population of people that are suffering from all kinds of different things, and there's all kinds of issues going on there that make certain people more vulnerable to being trapped in addiction. But then you have the drug dealers that come in and exploit that vulnerability for profit. And so I definitely think that people should not be criminalized at all for drug use. I don't think that that's a crime. I think that that's a response to the conditions of our lives and the oppressions that we deal with. So I think there's more to but there is a difference, again, between those who are in active addiction and those who are exploiting and profiting from those people's vulnerabilities.
Okay, just in my final questioning, we have $2.2 billion in the National Action Plan to end systemic racism and violence against women. What organizations do we need to fund to help the women who are vulnerable right now? What's the most efficient use of that dollars? Can you just quickly?
I can jump in there if that's okay.
Yes.
We need to not only do national Indigenous organizations. I know that was a comment earlier, and I wanted to speak to. We have to get the money into the communities where they'll do the community work best. And so when you're looking at autonomous Indigenous organizations, the majority of them are not connected to any national Indigenous organization. And so we need to have a balanced approach of the organizations that have a mandate to do Indigenous women specific work. And what is each agency's mandate? What is their priorities? Because then you end up with mission drifts. And so we have to look at funding those organizations that have been doing the work largely unfunded and unrecognized for generations. And so that's where that comprehensive approach needs to come from. And autonomous Indigenous women's specific organizations and agencies in Canada have been largely unfunded to date, and they need to be included in that funding model.
So just if I'm hearing you correct, just a thumbs up or thumbs down, I'm looking at you guys on the screen. Are you saying that we need to fund the local and regional organizations, not the national ones? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think you need to do both, but you can't just do only one model, because otherwise you miss an entirely large urban Indigenous population of organizations that have been doing this work who are not connected nationally.
Thank you very much. Committee and the witnesses, I understand that we're trying to connect with the missing witness, Chris Stark, and if we do that, we'll finish this round of questioning and then we'll allow the witness testimony and then see how much time we have left. But in the meantime, Madam Berube, your turn, 2.5.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Earlier, we spoke about programs and services for children that have been subject to exploitation and have been victims of human trafficking of now being looked after. What programs and services should be provided to these children who have been disturbed in this manner?
Is that for me? Okay, I can jump in there. We need to do a holistic approach that includes the family, that includes the parents, that includes, a healing together. And so especially around childhood, sexual exploitation, this is where culture plays in, but also a two-eyed seeing approach, which means that we blend both mainstream, services and practices and Indigenous culture, because we need to make sure that whatever the children needs is provided, and not just for the child, but for the whole family. Because that trauma, if we don't deal with the trauma in childhood, it carries on to mental health and addictions into adulthood. And so that holistic approach to healing the family unit from from that experience is what's needed. And so that's, we have to look at day treatment models where the family doesn't need to give up their children to go to addiction treatment services. And so we have to heal the whole family.
Aussi, vous avez
Well, thank you. Could you tell us, in terms of research, what the outcomes show? Well, when children disappear and they are subject to human trafficking, do you have statistics on that? Has there been an increase over recent years or in the pandemic, for example? Are there any statistics on those trends, please?
Yes, there is statistics that showing an increased the increase in demand, and so that's really what we're looking at. You have to decrease that demand, and here in Ontario, we finally started to build into anti-human trafficking strategies and making it illegal, and we have to enforce those laws. But yeah, our statistics have greatly shown. I do believe this year. We've seen a 37% increase in exits during since 2020. And so the demand continues to increase, especially when you're looking at access to the internet and the sexual, apps and porn and all of those pieces that continue to increase because we're being so reactive to this issue. We need to be more proactive. We need to start shutting down. We need to this is where police services need to be equipped with cyber, childhood exploitation in order to prevent it from that piece. But we need that holistic, systemic approach to address this issue.
Thank you. Rachel Blaney, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. Ms. Sky, I'm really struggling with understanding this divide that I've been hearing through testimony for the past several witnesses and days. We've heard testimony that there is a difference between sex work and human trafficking, adding the layer of the colonial history of Canada and its impacts on Indigenous people. How do we balance a response? We're hearing two sides. How do they come together, or how do you work on these two approaches simultaneously?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's a huge struggle, right? Because there's different people who have different experiences and different advocates and organizations that view how do you best support women. And I think it's important to recognize that because there is this, an emerging dichotomy between the types of services that people are willing to access, there's an increasing stigma around certain women's organizations and certain support networks that don't necessarily meet or are accessible to women who feel like they are who are engaging in sex work and who are looking for, oversight and regulation. And I think if we're looking at, what kind of policy approaches, what kind of regulation might exist around different types of places or different types of industries where there's a suspicion that there is trafficking or exploitation that exists within them, whether it be massage parlors, strip clubs, the like, that are legal and do operate under municipal regulations across Canada, that we look towards a strong regulation, that we look towards looking at sex workers as workers and ensuring that they have workers' rights, that they have stigma-free access to employment standards and employment supports that are accessible for workers, that there are ways that they can connect and have barrier-free services, and that if we do have an interest, if we do have a genuine interest in supporting women who have this experience, then again, it comes back to the other supports and services that are necessary that exist outside of, making it less safe for other women to engage in sex work. So we're looking at things like, basic income, accessible services, that there's an increase in the number of shelter services across the country. Right now, there are over 600 First Nations in Canada that don't have access to a women's shelter. don't have women's shelters in their communities. And so those are the kinds of solutions that need to be balanced with the kind of moral judgment that comes with discussing this topic.
Thanks very much. Mr. Clerk, just before we go on, are we having any luck with our other witness?
Yes, she's in contact with the IT. We're working to get her in, but it might take a few minutes. So I suggest we do another questioner.
Absolutely. And so Mr. Viersen, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
I'll give my time over to Mr. Vidal.
Barry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On Tuesday, we heard from Grand Chief Sate from Manitoba. He was talking about some of the rate differences between northern Manitoba and southern Manitoba. I serve a riding I represent a riding that's the north half of the province of Saskatchewan, and lots of remote and rural communities. So I'm going to open it up to any of the three of you, but I'm just curious if you would confirm what the Grand Chief told us about the rates being significantly higher for people from the northern and remote communities than it might be from southern communities. Is that information that you would agree with and would back up that we heard from him?
I don't know in terms of like the actual numbers, quantity, and I don't know if that's even the most useful way to think about it. I think that there's very unique barriers that people from more remote communities have, for sure, that are distinct from being in more urban centers. But I think the rates, I mean, it depends. There's a lot of you know, we can think about reporting. We can think like how people are able to report or not. You know, that's going to impact that. So I don't know if it's worse or better depending on the location. And I don't think that that's the best way to look at it. I think it's an issue. I think there's a lot of cases, obviously, that are unsaid. Women will never speak about what's been done to them. And so I think it's more focusing on the unique barriers that remote communities have, as opposed to trying to quantify, you know, where things are worse or better.
I appreciate, and I'm sorry, I'll let the other witnesses jump in. I want to interject here to kind of let you know where I was going here. My point more in focusing on kind of northern remote was he also talked about some significant points of critical intervention where there's opportunity to intervene or interject at the right points in the journey to as a preventative measure. So that was kind of more the stage that I was trying to set. So maybe what I would do is if any of you want to come back with this idea of are there, you know, some of the critical points of intervention that we could learn from a longer term prevention measure than necessarily quantifying or whatever. I didn't, you know, that wasn't my intent to talk about comparisons. It's more to find those points of intervention, I guess.
I agree. That's a really good question. And what we're seeing, there definitely is different northern realities. I do agree, and different interventions needed. And what we're seeing and hearing is that childhood sexual exploitation is happening so young, and we're not addressing it in our communities. You know, sexual violence is a learned behavior from colonization. And, you know, when you're looking at high rates of suicide and you're looking at that it's not safe to disclose being sexually abused, and that you're blamed for that situation happening. So where is the, you know, addressing sexual violence in our communities, in our First Nation communities? We need to begin there. We have to, if you want to get to the root cause and intervene early, we need services for children who are being exploited very young at home in those communities. And that's one piece that's a huge gap of what we're seeing, and does lead to trafficking later on in life as well, because if you've been sexualized from a youth going forward.
And you know, I'm gonna jump in and pick up on that again, because you led me right down another path that I wanted to ask. You talk about the you know, how young, the very young children that are being exploited and whatnot. So Bill C-92, which is a move for First Nations communities to take over their own child family services, and I'm sure you're very aware of that. Can you maybe speak to how the impact of that might be longer term as well, and the benefit of children being able to be in the care of their own communities and having the culturally appropriate upbringing and what benefit that might have, again, from a longer term prevention perspective?
Yeah, it doesn't go far enough, unfortunately, because it doesn't take into account and consideration the parents and the mothers. And so once again, like the most successful programs we've seen is where we're able to help support mom be mom, right? Or help support dad be dad, and help support grandma, and help support because if we don't include the parents into this conversation, we're going to continue to spin our wheels, and there hasn't been any healing. And so when we continue to only look at child welfare as the only option here, we're not actually transforming what we need to do. There's so much, healing that has to happen in our communities, and we need to include the parents into all of these conversations. We need to help them on their healing journey, or we need to support them, and we need to begin to really unpack our current approaches.
Thanks very much. Jaime Batiste, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for your testimony, all of you. Part of this committee's work is to make recommendations to our government on how we fix the problem. So what supports are there right now for women who are trying to transition away from human trafficking or sexual exploitation, and how are we helping transition and support Indigenous women? What are the programs that are working out there? And do you have any recommendations that you'd like to share with this committee on what we can do? What are the big priorities?
I can jump in there if that's okay. We do have one of the first pilots. Ours is called a Courage for Change program. We started it locally here in Thunder Bay, and then we just provincially did an expansion in order to ensure that we have those on-the-ground supports for survivors of human trafficking. And that's critical of what's missing. Our program is unique because it was developed by survivors in our engagement report. And they let us know that they need on-the-ground support. Like, we have so many education and awareness campaigns on this issue. We need to be able to do concrete action. And so our specialized trauma-informed care has been critical in seeing over 200 exits safely. And so now, as we've expanded across the province, we're going to be able to have on-the-ground support from being able to help safely transition women across the province, because we know that violence doesn't know boundaries, it doesn't know jurisdictions. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to chime in?
I know that there's been, and I think we heard or I was watching on Tuesday, there's a lot of really good work being done in Manitoba, provincially there, with different exiting programs. And there's kind of a patchwork of programs here and there across the country, but it really is, we need a broader approach and a more holistic approach. And I think that one of the things that I think is a huge problem is so much of the funding is project based. And so the amount of time that it takes a woman or a girl to recover, it can be a lifetime. There's it's not like, she enters into a program and after a year she's good, she's done, away she goes. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's not the case. And so it's that we're kind of putting these very kind of almost like bureaucratic, in some ways, timelines on women's healing, I think is really something that we need to look at. And then, like Cora was saying, these on the ground supports, the kind of basic kind of crisis supports that need to happen. And once you kind of move through that, I mean, there's housing, which is so important to have a stable base to work from, employment training, education. I know there was a mention on Tuesday about internships for women who've been sexually exploited. So all of these types of things need to happen, and with their recognition of the ongoing emotional impacts of being in that circumstance, and that they might show up 6 months later. They might show up 10 years later. There's women I know 10 years out who killed themselves because of that trauma. So it doesn't just disappear. And so I think really investing in women and investing in Indigenous women and girls, I can't think of a better thing to do, really. So.
Sky, would you like to chime in? I think you're on mute.
I am muted. Thank you. I do think it's important, if we're talking specifically about providing services for young people, that they not flow through child welfare agencies. And just for, I guess, the committee's information is that in Ontario, Peel Child Family Services is a center of excellence on responding to human trafficking. While at the same time, Peel Regional Police had indicated in the first year after Ontario passed human trafficking legislation that 100% of the people who had been trafficked, or young people that had been trafficked in Peel region, were clients of the Peel Child and Family Services. So there's a huge connection between child welfare, their inability to really support children, and then to also then ask them to service the people that have not been able to access safety through services. I think that there's there's community-based organizations outside of the child welfare sector that could be better positioned and have more credibility in the community to deliver services to young people.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee and witnesses, Ms. Stark deeply regrets the issues surrounding, the technical issues surrounding her inability to connect. Apparently, they didn't check before they dig kind of thing, and so her internet service is not available, and she was really hoping to join us today. But what I suggest, because we won't have a time for another full round of questions, and so as chair, if I may, could I ask each of you in a couple of minutes each as we approach 1 o'clock to tell us what you would like to see. You know, you brought forward your testimony. You've not only informed us, you've enriched us. I think all of us on the committee are really touched by the work, the effort, the intensity that goes into these dense and complex and personal problems, and that people are willing to work on them, such as you are. So hopefully we can meet some sort of expectation in the report that we'll put together with our staff and our analysts. But I'll ask Ms. McGuire-Surrett, Ms. Sky, and Ms. Smiley, each of you, to just wrap up for us based on your testimony and what you would like to see from us. Ms. McGuire-Surrett, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Yes. We definitely need to look at investment in Indigenous women specifically and in Indigenous women's safety. That's really clear and concrete of what's needed, not only safety, but also healing. Those approaches are what works, because even what Courtney spoke to on how violence against non-Indigenous women has decreased, and there's a direct correlation to the investment that was made into non-Indigenous women and their safety and their healing. And so we are asking for the same thing. We really do need to have action, and it needs to come from the community up in order for us to address this together. And we have provided some key recommendations that can be included in your report that will begin to be the first step in tackling this issue. And I want to thank everyone for agreeing to listen to us here today. And we're happy to help and have further conversations, and we'd recommend that you read our reports that we've written to help you more with more understanding from what we've learned here in Ontario.
Thanks so much. Courtney, Sky, your final remarks?
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, committee, for setting up the session and inviting me here today. I think that it's very important that, I know that there was a commitment to enrich the National Action Plan that was put forward a few weeks ago by the federal government on responding to the inquiry. And I think that that's, should be a high priority. There were huge gaps within the National Action Plan about whether or not it was actually setting down a baseline of measurement to actually know if we're having an impact with any of the programs and services that are being developed for Indigenous women, including, sexually exploited or trafficked women. And so I think that there needs to be a lens and a strong revision to that work that was put forward, because it simply doesn't go far enough, and it doesn't address any of the failures of Canada to fully participate in international human rights mechanisms. So I think that there's a lot of work and potential that could be done there. But I also think that what's important to remember is, Indigenous women and in the future, and advancements being made for the better our community and for our future generations. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. And Ms. Smiley.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me and doing this study. I think, just echo what Cora said about making investments in Indigenous women and Indigenous women's organizations. I think that having the space to heal, to learn from each other, to talk to each other, and to kind of do that on our own terms is incredibly important. I also think what's important is that we have that space for healing, but we also have that space for politics and to be political, to be parts of these discussions, and to be able to do that amongst ourselves in terms of organizing, politically organizing Indigenous women, so that we can advocate for not just ourselves, but for each other. And I know, and I'm sure that that's been the experience of the other witnesses here, is that the women that we come across and work with that's so often, that's what they want to do, is they want to help other women. And so we need to be having these spaces for healing, very important, but we also need to be having political spaces for Indigenous women to have debates and disagreements amongst ourselves, and to be able to do that on our own terms. And so it is really important that we have women-only space, that we have women-only, Indigenous women-only space, where we can begin and continue to build a political analysis from the commonalities and differences in our experiences. And so those spaces are being eroded all over the place. And I think if we have that, if we have those places, it goes beyond just social services for women, which are needed, of course, but we need more than that, right? We need the ability to imagine a better world for ourselves and for our sisters, and then be able to act on that vision. And so it really does, I think, pay out for the whole the whole of Canada, if we're given those opportunities. We will take them.
Well, thank you so much. All of you have made such an impression on us. These things, I know we'll go over notes and we'll look over, as our analysts will provide us with things to read, but your interventions really reach deeply inside us, and we won't be forgetting this in the next day or two. I can assure you of that. So thank you so much for a remarkable couple of hours. And Mr. Viersen, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just ensuring, there was some discussion about not having the meeting on next week Tuesday. I hope that's not the case. I hope we're continuing to have the meeting on next week Tuesday. And the other thing is, just to the analysts or to the clerk, are we able to table the report? I know that there's 2 days, like one in July and one in August, where things can happen. Are we able to table the report on one of those days?
If you're referring to backdoor or summer tabling, I believe it's possible, but I'll confirm with you via email.
Okay, and I will see you Tuesday. Mr. Viersen, perhaps you'd like to move to adjourn.
I move to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
In favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone.